Hello YouTube, welcome back to my channel. Tonight I'm going to show you guys how to butcher a deer. This is a whitetail doe that I harvested here in Pennsylvania tonight. The temperatures are crazy warm this evening. I think the high today was in the 70s and right now it's probably in the 60s, which means that this deer cannot hang overnight. I have to butcher it right now and get it cooled down. It's a perfect opportunity to show you how I like to break down my deer. If you're a beginner, if you've never broken down a deer before, or even if you have and you're just looking for a little more information and nuance to the different cuts of meat, you've come to the right video. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. This video is brought to you by Avid Armor. Avid Armor makes high quality vacuum sealers that are perfect for keeping your wild game meat fresher for longer. I use mine for wild mushrooms, fresh produce, and so much more. If you're interested in learning more, there's a link in the description box down below. For butchering deer, a boning knife is the way to go. This is an 8-inch boning knife by Cold Steel. It's got a skinny little tip that can help you get into some little nooks and crannies. You want a little bit of wiggle. See how I can wiggle this? So you can get around those bones, but not so flexible that you don't have control and precision over what you're doing. So boning knife is an absolute must. The first thing that I want to remove on this deer are the tenderloins. The tenderloins are these two beautiful long strips of meat located on the inside of the carcass. They are, like the name implies, very, very tender. It's one of the most prized cuts that you can get from a deer. So if you gut shot a deer, the tenderloins may need a little trimming and you really want to get them out as quickly as possible because there will be some contamination on the outside of them. Sometimes, depending on the hunt, you may not get to keep those tenderloins if you gut shot the animal because they'll be too contaminated. So just something to keep in mind. Your shot placement matters and the way that you gut the animal matters, so you want to try and keep those as clean as possible. To make our lives a little easier to get to these tenderloins, I'm going to cut down and remove some of this flank meat. And right at the seam where it meets up with the hind quarter, I'm just going to make some cuts and pull away, being sure that I'm not cutting into the tenderloin meat. So oh, see, I did make a little nick right there, but this is the tenderloin. So I'm trying to avoid cutting that by pulling away and just filleting some of this flank meat down. Now I'm kind of unveiling another really incredible cut right here. I think this is an interesting shot. This is the back strap right here, and this is the tenderloin. They sandwich together, and the tenderloin and the back strap are two of the best cuts on the animal, most tender cuts. So just as I was trying not to cut the tenderloin, you also want to make sure that you're not cutting into the back strap. You'll cut this flank meat down until you hit the first rib, which I am, oh, not yet. There we are. Okay, so I've hit that first rib. Can't go any further. I'm just going to turn my knife 180 and cut all the way across. So at this point, I'm just tracing the outline of that rib. So now we have our first piece of grind meat. It does not look pretty right now, and it's not going to look pretty right now. That's not the point of this step in the butchering process. Right now, we're just breaking this animal down into more manageable cuts, and we will clean this up and save this piece for grind. So let's set this aside. Now we repeat the same thing on the opposite side. Wow, look at that fat. It's unreal. We cleaned the tenderloins up a little bit so that you can see them better, but they run from right down here all the way up, and they go pretty deep inside up here. So I'm going to start kind of in the middle and then fillet them off. So all I'm doing is pushing and pulling away. See how you can naturally see the different muscle groups here? So I'm pulling away and cutting with my knife until it's released from the bone. You can actually hear my knife running against the bones. That's exactly what you want. See how it's all coming off in one piece? Stick my knife in, cut away to release that tenderloin. Now we can see how far up it goes until it doesn't go anymore. Then you cut it out. First one, or where the untouched one is, and then how high up this one goes. You can cut that. Just like that. That's a tenderloin. And repeat that on the other side. Next thing to do is remove the front shoulders. Now, there is a reason why we're doing it in this order. You need to remove the front shoulders because they run all the way back and around, and they cover up a portion of the back strap. So we want to remove those shoulders first so that when we remove the back straps, we can get all the way down and get as much yield as possible. So to remove the shoulders, you're really following the seam like of the armpit. When you push away here, can you hear that? And you can see that. There's some fascia through here that you'll follow that seam of the armpit and cut with your knife. There's not actually anything, any joint that's truly holding the shoulder in place. It's just muscle and connective tissue. Straight down through. Oh, my knife's getting dull. And then I can push that away more. We're going to continue cutting right along that seam, right here. See how that? As I move this shoulder, you can start to see and feel the rest of the shoulder blade. Once you get the shoulder to this point, you are in danger of cutting into the back strap in this zone. So just take your time and really feel where the shoulder blade is, because you're just tracing around that shoulder blade to get this off. So I have my hand underneath here, and I'm kind of holding the shoulder away to then get my knife in and make that cut. Okay? Repeat the same thing on the opposite side. Moving on to the back straps. Now this doe has so much fat on her. Normally you can see the back straps, but with this doe, there's a layer of fat. The hind quarters come together and there's this sort of like natural pinch point. This is typically where you cut. And I'm gonna go all the way across, but I'm going to skin back some of this fat so you can see the meat underneath. It's like a bear. Whole layer of fat.
Yeah, it's like a 1/4 inch.
Yeah. Now you can see the beautiful back straps underneath. We're gonna start up here, and we're just going to make a perfect cut straight across until you hit the spine. Just like that. Now, you can feel in the center where the bones of the spine are. I'm going to flip my knife around, and using my knife tip, I'm going to cut back till I can't go through anymore with my blade shifted towards the spine. I'm going to slowly draw my way down, making a cut all the way down to the neck. Once you're here, you can begin to peel the back strap away and then fillet the meat off the bone. That's all you're doing. So I'm going to peel back right here on this corner that we just made. And as I'm running my knife, I should be hitting bone. Hear that? The whole time. All right, now we're to here. You can really start to see the back strap itself taking form, and you can see the contour of where it was just sitting. So as you pull down, see how this kind of wants to peel away on its own? You can start to peel it away on its own and then sort of just help it out by cutting any connective tissue that remains. Once you hit this rib, I need to make sure that this rib is not, see how that fat was kind of catching our back strap? You just continue to point your knife towards the bone and pull the meat down. I'm at the base of the neck, and that's as far down as I want to go. So I'm going to make a straight cut to release the back strap. Look at that. That. One back strap down. Repeat the same thing on the other side. Next, I'm going to remove the rest of the meat that is covering the ribs. Now, obviously this girl's got a lot of fat, so I need to remove some of the fat, but I can do that later in the butchering process. Really, all I'm going to do here is grab this meat and fat that's remaining, pull it away from the body, and run my knife down the bones. There's essentially a layer of fat and meat that runs on the outside of the ribs that you want to remove before we remove in between the ribs. Now this is important to show too. So all of this is blood from the shot. Most of this will actually clean up. I know it doesn't look like it, but a lot of this will just wash right away. It's just coagulated blood. If it rinses away, you're fine. But if you try and rinse and it remains a dark color, a dark red color, that will just need to be cut away and discarded. But by removing this hunk of meat and fat, it revealed some of the bloodshot that's going on beneath. Next thing to do is to cut in between the ribs. So it's easiest to see what I'm talking about if we look from the inside. Between each rib, so here's a rib, here's a rib, here's a rib, is a long strip of meat. On a small doe like this, you're not gonna get a lot of meat. I keep these strips for grind meat. On a larger animal like an elk or a moose, this meat becomes a lot more valuable because it's a lot bigger. You get a lot more yield out of it. If this deer was gut shot, the whole inside of this cavity would be contaminated with stomach contents, poop contents, gross things that you don't want touching your meat. Because this deer was shot through the lungs and heart, this cavity stayed clear and clean. All that's in here is blood, maybe a couple little specks of leaves from the drag out, but by no means is this a contaminated rib cage. So to remove the rib meat, all I'm doing is poking in right above the rib, shifting my knife blade towards the rib, cutting across, flipping it up, cutting straight up, flipping it over and doing the same thing, running that knife blade now along the top rib till we reach the end, cutting down, and that is a little piece of rib meat. Again, not much on this little small doe, but worth keeping for grind. After you remove the rib meat, it's time to remove the neck, and it is the same vibe. We are just trying to cut every piece of meat off of the bone. For me, the neck is always grind meat, so I'm not worried about keeping the muscle groups together. I am straight up just trying to cut all of this meat off of the bone. That also goes for this brisket area as well. I'm going to remove the neck and the brisket just by cutting and filleting off the bone. Don't need to worry about muscle structure here, just get it off the carcass. I do find it easiest to run the line of the spine just because you know the spine is running straight down. Only thing you want to be careful of is down here where the esophagus and the trachea were. That can be a spot of contamination if you didn't remove it properly, so just be aware of that. Now it's time to remove both hindquarters. The easiest way that I have found to do this is to cut the spine with a Sawzall. You can use a regular saw if that's what you got, and then you want to put the pelvis with both hindquarters down on a table to give you some leverage to actually remove the hip from the joint. It takes quite a bit of work cutting. Now all there is to do is to remove the pelvic bone from the hindquarters. If you're a newbie, this is going to take some trial and error. There are a lot of little grooves that you got to get around. I'll do my best to show you where those little grooves are, but just know that it's okay if you don't get every last bit of meat the first couple times you do this, because it does take time to figure this out. So remember, the back straps ran to here, and this is where we cut them off. But the back strap doesn't really go away. This turns into a cut that we call the sirloin butt. It's this top portion that wraps up around the hindquarter. It's on top of the pelvis. So by flipping the meat back over, we can follow this line of the vertebrae on both sides and begin to peel the hindquarter from this end.
You know what a Yinzer thing is? Replacing the word both with either.
So that's about as far as I'm going to go from the back on this side. Repeat the same thing over here. Time to flip it back over. There's a bony process that sticks out, and you want to get your knife blade against it and start to follow it down until you can pull back some of that meat and start to trace the pelvis along. So I'm not going in very deep here, just enough so that I can feel the bone and pull away the meat. And eventually we will start to reveal the hip joint, which is what we want. So this is the hip joint. Now that we have it exposed, I'm going to stick the tip of my knife in here and work around cutting until this is released. See how that ball's already out of the socket? Now it's the meat right here that's still hanging onto the pelvis. So I'm pressing my knife against the bone and cutting around and down. Those fallen acorns. It is clearly a mast deer, that is for sure. Okay. So there's just tiny little bit left. This bone, I just need to follow. Down and around. That's a hindquarter. Final thing to do is to remove the lower portion of legs from the hindquarter. So I like to go ahead and cut this first with my knife. That releases this down and can make it a little bit easier to skin away some of this fur. I'll make a cut right there with my Sawzall on both sides. Then we can get this in the cooler. That is all there is to it. I hope that you found something helpful from this video. If you have any questions at all, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And I will see you guys in the next one.